That's a laser raptor. Oh, what year is this?
It's the Viking Age.
That explains the laser raptor.
I'm currently on a mission to play through and rank all of the games in the Far Cry series. All of them. Every last one of them. Literally every Far Cry game that has ever been released. Except these ones. So far on this wild and foolhardy journey, we have blasted our way through 3 very different but very enjoyable games. We've had a somewhat linear shooter with some questionable checkpointing and frankly bullshit difficulty spikes. We then had an unforgiven African-themed shooter that seemingly didn't give a toss about whether you enjoyed yourself or not. And finally we had a bright and slightly more forgiving shooter that questioned the sanity and perception of its player character and was so successful that it set the template for open world shooters for several years to come. In the 4th installment of this ranking series, we come to the little gem that is Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, the game they announced on April Fool's Day and were seemingly surprised that no one thought it was a real thing. It's easy to forget, or just not know about, when Ubisoft used to take quite a few risks with their games and try new things occasionally. Beyond Good and Evil, the PS2 Prince of Persia trilogy, XIII or 13 or however you pronounce that, games that dared to be different from everything else that was being released and likely wouldn't be developed by the Ubisoft of today, who instead prefer to stick to their tried and tested game styles. Blood Dragon and later Primal feel like the last gasping breaths of the spirit that the studio once had, which I feel makes these games even more interesting to look back on. Anyone who watched my Far Cry 3 video may remember that somewhere in that 59 minutes of talking bollocks I mentioned that due to technical issues with Far Cry 3 and Blood Dragon at the time, I'd never managed to complete this game. For some reason it just would not load saves, and that was if the game even decided to run at all. So this does mark the first time playing about 3/4 of this game, which does heavily limit any nostalgia bias that might affect my opinions on this title. Like I said, Blood Dragon was officially announced on the 1st of April 2013, so naturally everybody thought it was a joke. I seem to remember it being just a short video displaying the game's title and some sort of marketing spiel full of 80s cliches and references. Many of us were quite happily surprised to later learn that this was in fact a real game that was actually being made, and this was part of Ubisoft's scheme to bring new people to their different series through enticing DLCs. For the benefit of any younger people watching, DLCs were still a relatively new thing at this point, and releases like Blood Dragon were traditionally called expansion packs, but that's one entire syllable more than DLC, so developers and publishers were still experimenting with what a DLC could be. Luckily, this was before anyone realised that skins and in-game currencies were lucrative as fuck, so we actually got some quality content, with the first of these from Ubisoft being the Tyranny of King Washington DLC for Assassin's Creed 3, which is set in an alternate timeline and lets you play around with some superpowers. While that particular example wasn't standalone content, it did allow the development team to have a bit more freedom with what they could do in the game, and it was this spirit that was carried forward and seemingly multiplied a few hundred times with Blood Dragon.
And I shoot lasers out of my fucking eyes.
Though I would argue that if you want to bring new players into your series, maybe drop the number 3 from the title, no? The development team at Ubisoft Montreal were allowed to abandon everything presented in Far Cry 3, which again confuses me as to why they put the 3 in the title. Obviously they needed to keep the core gameplay mechanics intact, as the point is to draw more people into your series, so it'd be no good if they made a football manager type game where you train up scientists to, I don't know, play football against cyborg commandos or something. Ubisoft were open to suggestions regarding the setting of this spin-off. And it was a suggestion by a chap called Dean Evans, who had previously worked on Assassin's Creed 3 and Splinter Cell Conviction, that caught their attention. Around this time, films like Manborg and Hobo with a Shotgun had found themselves something of an audience. These are modern films that are made to feel like they came out in the 80s or the early 90s. I haven't seen or even heard of Manborg before, but I do seem to remember Hobo with a Shotgun feeling like one of those retro-futuristic films. Like, this is what people of the past thought the future would be like, and Evans felt that this niche was not being represented in video games, so why not cater to that audience? Apparently, the higher-ups at Ubisoft agreed, and Evans even managed to get the director of Hobo with a Shotgun, Jason Eisner, to join the project as an informal advisor. This goal to celebrate the sci-fi action movies of the 80s also convinced Michael Biehn to join as the voice of player character Rex Power Colt. Apparently he was initially reluctant to do any more voice work after his experience with Alien's Colonial Marines, but it was after meeting Dean Evans and probably realising that this chap actually wants to make something fun and interesting that Michael decided to join the project.
And when I saw the passion that this guy had for this game, I thought, like, this is either going to be an awesome game or it's never going to get released.
And I've really enjoyed the relationship that we forged, and it's just a relationship I feel will...
Don't touch me.
Didn't say that last week.
I hope this thing fails.
According to the Wikipedia page, Evans would hold weekly cyborg nights, where the team would watch sci-fi and action films for inspiration on the look and sound of the game. And they were later able to bring on board Power Glove to provide the soundtrack for the game, who apparently also composed the music for Hobo with a Shotgun, funnily enough, and they also managed to grab the Airwolf sound designer to be the audio director for the project. So yeah, there's some serious talent being brought on board, all for a piss-take game referencing the 80s for a few hours. The game was also given a 6-month deadline, meaning that this is a much shorter experience than any of the previous games in the series. I do have mixed opinions on the game's length, which I'll get into later, but for now we have a shorter, standalone Far Cry experience, completely removed from any of the previous games, and set in an 80s vision of the deep, dark future of 2007. In what is likely an unintentional similarity to the first Far Cry game, the story here is, as you may expect, typical 80s action movie stuff. So you really should not be coming to this expecting deep narratives or clever twists or anything like that, and as such I wouldn't really worry about spoilers, but do consider this your spoiler warning because I'm about to really get stuck in on a deep dive of the story of Blood Dragon, which should take about 2 minutes max. During the end of the 20th century, the world became engulfed in nuclear war. A war between... actually, I'm not sure the game ever tells you this. From a couple of lines of dialogue, I think it's probably between Russia and America. At one point I thought it was the US versus Australia, but I then remembered that that's from the Grand Theft Auto universe. Anyway, from the ashes of North America rises a new breed of soldier, the Mark IV, which, now I think about it, suggests that our character, Rex Power Colt,
Remember that name.
was killed and then rebuilt into a cyber commando. Was he a normal, fully human commando before this, or was he just a Mark III? Who knows? Who cares? Not us. Let's get to the shooting. Rex and his buddy Spider have been sent to assault a mysterious facility on an island somewhere, where they eventually learn that an old sergeant of theirs called Sloan has gone rogue and is planning on using rockets powered by the blood of the blood dragons to blow up the planet or something.
Nobody threatens my planet.
There's also another bad guy knocking around that's creating zombies, because of course there is, why wouldn't there be? Spider dies, Sloan's chief researcher Dr. Darling turns on him and helps you to bring down his operation. Along the way you kill said zombie-creating bad guy. Well, I mean his AI assistant kills him.
Unable to comply. This 8-bit piece of fucking hardware is obviously incapable of accommodating your superior needs.
Don't kill me.
Unable to comply.
You pass some sort of ancient battle trial and storm Sloan's base while riding a blood dragon fitted with a laser cannon.
This is pretty. Have a nice day.
Killing Sloan in a cutscene. The end. Or is it? Dun dun dun. Hardly a deep thinking piece, but that's not what we're here for. This game is very much channeling some serious so bad it's good energy. And whether you think it's any good greatly depends on your tolerance for references as a form of humor. Have you ever seen an 80s action or sci-fi film? There will be a reference to it in here somewhere.
You have 20 seconds to comply.
I mean, hell, there's even a Slayer reference tucked into one of the story missions. Even the limited amount of guns available to play with are references to different films. Or at least I assume that to be the case. I recognise the burst fire pistol from RoboCop, and the Galleria shotgun is clearly from Terminator 2, but I'm obviously not enough of an 80s sci-fi aficionado to recognise the other weapons. I'd guess the minigun is from Predator though, but the only evidence I have to support that is the opening section when you are ripping through an enemy base, firing it from a helicopter while the music from the helicopter ride in Predator plays. There's even a training montage and a totally non-essential sex scene between the hero and the only other woman in the story. Ah, the 80s. The point I'm trying to make here is that if you don't care or enjoy anything about the 80s, if you don't find humour or value in references to other things, or if you don't think that things can be so deliberately bad that they then become good, then I doubt you will enjoy Blood Dragon. There are some gameplay differences between this and Far Cry 3, but not nearly enough to recommend what would be suffering through a whole heap of material that you have no interest in. If you don't even come close to breathing slightly sharply through your nose at the reveal of the Battle Armored Dragon Assault Strike system, then yeah, maybe give this one a pass. However, if you are down for spending about 13 quid on stabbing cyborg dickheads with a glowing knife while spouting cheesy one-liners,
School's out for summer, school's out forever,
then stick around and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it all. You know when games add in a film grain filter effect over everything? Personally, I always, 100% of the time, without exception, turn that off. Except with Blood Dragon. There's a strong VHS aesthetic here, with fuzzy neon lights and fuzzy sound effects and fuzzy other stuff. I don't quite understand why, but despite being a decently sized open world, the game felt quite claustrophobic to me. Maybe it's the permanent darkness that limits your visibility or something like that, but I do find this game to have a very unique visual style and feel to it. The sky is, initially at least, littered with towers of red light projecting the logo of the enemy, Omega Force, marking the location of their outposts. Enemy soldiers fire lasers at you, which sound like the lasers from the future bits in the Terminator films. Animals have been given a cyberpunk redesign and have shiny metal skin or glowing eyes, and they screech synthesized calls and roars at you. Off in the distance of the skybox, you can see the silhouettes of destroyed cities, with flashing lights, the only signs that the fight is still raging within them. All the while, an ambient track is pulsing while you explore. A track so close to the music that plays whenever the Terminator is just walking around menacingly that I'm surprised it didn't get removed due to copyright infringement. With all of these visuals and environmental details dripping in retro-futuristic goodness, it's a shame that the vehicles are all pretty much exactly the same as they were in Far Cry 3, they're just black with an Omega symbol on them. Couldn't they have added some neon strips and made them hover or something? Not fly, just hover around and make hovercar noises. There have been a few new or altered mechanics for this game that differ from the base Far Cry 3 release. Arguably the most impactful is the new skill upgrade system. Despite my Far Cry 3 video being 59 fucking minutes long, I somehow forgot to talk about the skill tree, where you get 1 point every time you level up, and you can then spend that on your choice of different categories of upgrades, theoretically allowing you to tailor your skills to your playstyle, but in actuality just delaying when you can access certain skills because you will get enough points to unlock almost all of them eventually. Likely due to this being a shorter game, this system of letting you choose how you upgrade is thrown out for a linear sequence of ability upgrades. When you get enough skill points, you level up and will automatically acquire a new skill. Be that an extra health bar, the ability to move faster while crouched, or chain takedowns, or whatever it might be. I didn't really feel any emotion about the skill tree system in Far Cry 3, because like I say, it wasn't so much of a case of creating your own build, and more about choosing which skill you can live without for a little bit longer until you get the upgrades you really want. All of the more useful upgrades, like different takedowns and stealth movement, could be unlocked fairly quickly, and it's the same with this system. You just have no say on whether you can unlock faster sneaking or aerial takedowns first. I feel like this linear system makes sense for this shorter game. I completed my playthrough in about 6 hours, which included taking all of the outposts but left out a big chunk of the side missions, so there isn't really room for an expansive skill tree in this more compact game. And of course, let's not forget that this is a shooter first and foremost, not an RPG. Those lines were not quite as blurry back in 2013. Another new mechanic are the titular blood dragons. These chaps are introduced at the end of the first proper mission, and these are giant glowing dragons that shoot lasers out of their eyes. Likely because of this, their vision is a bit crap, or at least that's what the game tells you, but they still manage to shoot me pretty fucking accurately from the other side of an enemy base. Anyway, if you sneak around, then these guys will not detect you, but they can be attracted or distracted by the hearts of your fallen enemies that you have ripped from their chests. Enemies don't drop cash or bits of tat to sell like in Far Cry 3. They only drop ammunition and their most vital of organs. Well, they don't drop those, like I say, you rip them from their chests. The blood dragons just love these and will chase after them if you throw them, and will tend to attack anyone that just happens to be in that area. This means that you can use these chaps to your advantage when trying to conquer enemy outposts, which mechanically remain mostly unchanged from Far Cry 3. There are alarm posts to disable to prevent them from calling in reinforcements, and outposts are usually full of a good variety of enemy types, and there's always a few different ways of sneaking your way in. One new addition is the presence of enemy pilots sat waiting for orders in their helicopters. If you do get spotted and start a big gunfight, these guys will take off and start circling you, hailing down fire from the air. None of this will be much of a problem for a sneaky chap luring a blood dragon in to clear the area out. But to combat this, all bases have a mega shield installed that blood dragons just cannot bypass. These shields can be disabled either by destroying a nearby generator, which I think I only did once as part of the Mega Shield tutorial, or you can sneak in and find the button that brings the shields down, letting you throw internal organs around and bring the pain to the cyber bastards standing in your way. But the downside to this is that once the outpost has been cleared, you'll still have to deal with the angry dragon you just summoned here. And these guys are a tough fight, especially in the early game. These are big, red, furious creatures that will explode if you unload into a glowing spot under their rolls of fat, just like your mum. As you progress through the story, you'll start encountering blood dragons wearing special metal hats. These make them ignore both mega shields and enemy soldiers, so you'll have to shoot this off their heads if you want to manipulate them into clearing out enemy bases. I did play around with these dragon mechanics a little bit during my playthrough, but to be honest, most of the time I forgot that these were an option. Maybe because I just come from playing Far Cry 3, I just stuck to those same techniques to clear enemy bases. I will say though that to me, it felt like the enemy outpost design in Blood Dragon offered up more options for approach, with some letting you climb up the back of observation towers or come in over zip lines or through underground tunnels to get within the perimeter. Taking outposts rewards you with some XP, but unlike Far Cry 3, you don't seem to get any extra XP for stealth clears or anything like that. But clearing the outpost will provide you with a fast travel point, just like Far Cry 3, and will open up a weapon shop and some side missions for you to complete. All of these things relate to weapons, so I guess now is as good a time as any to look at the boomsticks on offer. Roll the montage. I briefly mentioned earlier that the range of weapons on offer here is much more limited than I think in any of the other games in this series so far, but then this is a shorter game, so I guess that balances out, though I still would have appreciated a bit more variety. You have your pistol based off Robocop's gun, an assault rifle, a sniper rifle, and your Terminator 2 shotgun given to you pretty much right from the start. And because this is a game from the early 2010s, you also get a glowing bow and arrow, as was the style at the time. Later on, you also get that minigun I mentioned, and for the final mission, you'll be able to shoot an incredibly powerful laser out of your fingers that slowly drains your health, but by that point you'll have so much health that this isn't really any sort of punishment, certainly not enough to put me off using it anyway. Now, this is very subjective. I mean, all of this is subjective, obviously, but I'm not a big fan of laser guns in FPS games. Turn-based games like XCOM or the old Fallouts, yeah, great, let's have them, they're brilliant. But in shooters, I tend to avoid them when I can because they just don't sound as satisfying to me as real guns. The shotgun here does feel pretty good to use as it blows the heads clean off the shoulders of enemies, but reloading takes long enough to make me want to use it sparingly during hectic fights. I think I maybe used the bow and arrow for one encounter, and after that never bothered with it again. The guns are fine and satisfying enough to use, but just for me, the pew pew pews just don't hold up against the rat-a-tat-tat of more realistic weaponry. They're just not as punchy as they could be. Like in Far Cry 3, you can add weapon mods to your weaponry, but the method of unlocking these upgrades is something I'm personally not a fan of. I mentioned that clearing outposts unlocks some side missions, and these come in two flavors, either killing a certain animal with a certain weapon or rescuing a scientist from enemy soldiers. These missions will reward you with specific modifications for a specific weapon, which could be a full auto mode for your assault rifle, explosive rounds for your sniper, larger magazine capacity, laser sights, and so on and so forth. Thing is, you have no way of knowing which missions unlock which upgrade, so it's pot luck as to which upgrade you'll have available to you. If there's something in particular that you want, you'll either have to keep clearing outposts and hope that this time you get a chance to earn that upgrade, or look up a guide online and figure out which one you need to do. It's hardly an ideal situation, and a change which I feel is a downgrade from Far Cry 3, which just charged you money to unlock whichever upgrade you wanted. Those animal hunting missions are basically the same as their Far Cry 3 counterparts, but the scientist rescue mission are a different twist on the assassination missions from the last game. A scientist will be being held captive by some enemy commandos, sometimes in the middle of a camp or maybe at the end of a cave or whatever it might be. If you get spotted by an enemy, they'll alert the others who will then kill the scientist, leaving you a very small window to kill any soldiers near your target. I kind of wish this was mixed into the Far Cry 3 missions to give them a bit more variety, and while they can get a little bit repetitive here, the shorter length of the game meant that, for me at least, they didn't outstay their welcome too much. And I found the more open-ended nature of the environment meant that it's sometimes possible to position yourself between the scientists and their enemies, creating a conga line of death as you blast your way through enemy soldiers. In terms of new and unique gameplay mechanics, that's pretty much it. I quite liked the streamlined skill unlock system, but I just wish we could buy weapon upgrades. You can also buy armor from shops along with health packs, and unfortunately this is the only reliable method of acquiring healing syringes. You can pick up health packs scattered around during story missions, but the crafting system for Far Cry 3 has been completely removed here, meaning you have no way of crafting your own healing items. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not clamoring for a crafting system in this game, but some other method of acquiring health packs instead of travelling back to a captured outpost would have been appreciated. The healing system itself works in exactly the same way as Far Cry 3. Healing syringes heal you for a set amount of health slots, and partially reduced slots will fill back up over time. If you don't have any healing syringes, you'll play one of those famous healing animations, be that digging bullets out with your finger, welding your metal arm back together, or just squeezing on a hand exercise thing for a little bit to boost that health back up again. Again, like with Far Cry 3, there seem to be much less of these animations than I expected, but again, this is a shorter game put together in 6 months, so that kind of makes sense. I also didn't encounter any of those animal attack animations, other than maybe one of the snake attacks. I've since seen footage of these animal attacks, so I know they can happen, they just didn't happen to me. It must be in Far Cry 4 and onwards that these things happen more often, as like with Far Cry 3, I was expecting this to happen a lot more frequently. The final thing I want to talk about relating to the game design here is the cutscenes. Now again, I understand that this game was put together in 6 months, and frankly I think it's pretty phenomenal that they got so much done in that space of time, but it seems like animated cutscenes were just too time consuming. Their solution then was to lean into the aesthetic they're going for, and instead of 3D rendered cutscenes, we get little pixelated images that bounce up and down occasionally. These feel very much par for the course, and they're only about a minute long each at most, so they don't interrupt the gameplay too much. That is until you get to the end of the game. One of these things lasts for about 5 minutes, and even includes a stereotypical training montage and a sex scene. Unlike Sex With Me, this all went on for far too long, and just like Sex With Me, sticking to a minute or so would have been preferential. I got bored watching very little happen except building up the narrative, which I didn't care about because it really didn't seem like we're supposed to give a shit about it, so for the game to suddenly go relatively narrative heavy seemed like an odd decision. It is followed by a big power fantasy section though, with you storming a base with a laser shooting out your fingers before riding a laser dragon right into the enemy stronghold. It would have been nice to have some sort of fight with Sloane though, who dies in another non-cutscene. People complain about Vast being defeated with a single button press, and Sloane takes even less effort than that. Which, taken as a whole, is just about all there is to cover with Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. This is the core gameplay system of Far Cry 3, streamlined somewhat to fit a shorter experience and ran through a filter of cheesy 80s excess and stereotypes. This game also ran better than Far Cry 3 for me, as I experienced absolutely zero crashes during my time with this game. There is one issue, however, in that every time I opened the pause menu, the game would try to connect with the Blood Dragon servers, preventing me from doing absolutely anything until it had done so. The thing is, I feel fairly confident in saying that those servers were shut down a long time ago, so every time you pause the game to quit, or save, or check the in-game item descriptions, you'll have to wait for about 30 seconds just to let the game call into the void for servers which just aren't there anymore. Now, this is hardly a game-breaking issue, but it was a recurring annoyance that, speaking as someone with less than zero coding experience, feels like it could have been patched out fairly easily. There's clearly still quite a lot of love for this game out there on the internet. Apparently there's some Trials DLC based on this game.
This one will take it to the extreme.
And I read about a Netflix show called Captain Laserhawk, a Blood Dragon remix, though judging by the trailer, the only similarity seems to be the cyberpunk aesthetic and the fact that there are references to other IPs. I've never heard of this show before, which leads me to believe it's not very good, or maybe it's excellent and I should watch it once I've finished watching Fallout. Let me know in the comments. Either way, the fact that they are still using the Blood Dragon name to draw people in shows that there is a lot of love for this quirky little expansion pack, and the only barrier to entry seems to be whether or not you find references and deliberately bad writing a valid form of humour. Which I guess leaves us with putting this on my ranking list, and I'm now realising how tough this ranking list is at this point. We've had 4 games that share a name but are all so different from each other that putting one above the other feels arbitrary when they cater to very different needs. So I guess the only way I can really think to put these in some sort of order is if in a year from now I had to pick one Far Cry game to play through in its entirety, where would Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon be on my order of preference? And to answer that question, I'd have to put it here, below Far Cry 2. Now that most of anyone still watching has already stopped listening and taken to the comments to call me names or whatever, let me clarify that I by no means think that this is a bad game. This is a great game that I recommend anyone who enjoys shooters and or cheesy action films to experience. But in terms of Far Cry experiences, if I were forced to only play one of these games, I would choose Far Cry 3 first. If that wasn't available, then I'd pick 2, and if that disc was scratched or whatever, then I'd request Blood Dragon. This is a shorter experience that basically makes the same joke over and over again, but luckily I enjoyed that joke and was happy to go on that little ride with a group of people that clearly had a lot of love for the source material. Well, look at that, I managed to keep my rambling down to less than an hour this time. Maybe I'm growing as a person. Anyway, this now leaves us looking forward to Far Cry 4, the Far Cry game I have played the most since its release, but only because I couldn't get Far Cry 3 to work for such a long time, so number 4 was the next best thing. That's a full-length game, so that video will take a bit longer to put out, especially as work keeps threatening to send me to Malaysia for a couple of weeks, so I can only hope that the next video will be out at some point in July, maybe, but I guess only time will tell. If you're still watching at this point, then frankly I think you owe me a like, I mean, come on. And if you haven't subscribed and would like to support this nonsense, then please do consider subscribing, as it really does seem to help put this shite in front of more people. And if you haven't enjoyed this video, then you've just wasted a good chunk of your day. Thanks for the increased view count, dickhead.
I hope this thing fails.